Women that come to us who have sudden ADHD symptoms, they didn't have them before. Yes, it can be hormonally driven. Absolutely it can. But they could also have, for example, the IUD coil. If it's a copper coil, they've got a source of copper in their body. And if they're born not able to excrete enough copper, that's going to be terrible. Point is, there are biochemical imbalances, and you can treat those imbalances by giving the body what it needs in terms of vitamins, minerals, amino acids at high enough doses that it can rebalance itself.
Sarah Warley is an Oxford University educated global expert in neurodiversity,
specializing in drug-free approaches to better brain health.
Sarah founded the Key Clinic to make life easier for those with ADHD without medications.
There are definitely biochemical imbalances. The majority of people who have ADHD. We now know that copper acts as a cofactor to an enzyme that takes dopamine, so that's the thing we all know we don't have enough of, and it pushes it into being norepinephrine, which is the thing that makes you nervous and anxious or angry. It's the adrenaline-like response. If you have too much copper, especially free copper, your dopamine is going to be pushed into this other pathway. And zinc has the opposite balancing effect on copper. So if you've got lots of zinc, you'll have lower copper. And if you've got lots of copper, the chances are your zinc's going to be very low.
Do you think that there's a treatment for the emotional side of ADHD?
I always start with...
Quick one before I get distracted. I just wanted to say a very brief thank you to all of my listeners. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you for subscribing and following the podcast. It really, really helps. At ADHD Chatter, my mission is to ask the world-leading experts the hard questions to give you access to the most pioneering advice the world has to offer, and with an aim to help you feel seen. Following and subscribing helps me on my mission to book these incredibly insightful guests and to give you these incredibly insightful interviews. Remember, you're not broken, just different, and you have always been enough. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited. I feel like so many people who listen and watch this podcast feel like they want to go back and reassure the younger version of themselves that they're not broken, they're just different. And although many of us obviously can't do that, I feel like this episode, the topics that we're going to go to, are going to provide a resource for the younger versions of many of the listeners. Before we get into all of that, what would you say your mission is in the world of ADHD, and why did you found the Key Clinic?
It's a good question. I think I felt that the mainstream approach to dealing with all sorts of neurodiversity was just not complete, and I wanted better answers. I think a lot of people wait forever for a diagnosis, thinking the diagnosis will somehow be the solution, and it isn't. And it's a culture of diagnose and discharge. And it seems that there are only two mainstream options on the table. It's either medicate or find ways to compensate, find ways around the problem. And I just wanted to know more than that. I wanted to understand more. I wanted to know what are the underlying root causes of these issues, really to swim upstream from the symptoms and understand them better, to be able to then tackle those root causes. And so that really was behind why I founded the Key Clinic. So I wanted to have lots of different evidence-based therapies that could be real game changers, but all under one roof. Because I found also a lot of places that I'd experienced specialized in just one thing. And, there's a saying, if all you've got is a hammer, every problem's a nail. And I wanted there to be an objective way of looking and assessing symptoms and saying, well, look, what can we do more fundamentally at the root cause level?
So interesting. What you mentioned, you either take medication or you start compensating. But have you noticed, because you're in quite a unique position, right? What key or common ways do you see people compensating for their ADHD traits post-diagnosis?
Yeah. If they're not taking medication, how do they compensate for it? Generally, anyone with any kind of neurodiversity has to work harder. Okay, so first of all, they've got that huge effort of masking that I know you've talked about before, and that's exhausting. I've never quite understood why it is people that aren't neurotypical have to go the distance to look neurotypical. Why can't the neurotypical people go the distance and meet them? I've never quite got that. So you've got that, and then things aren't coming in as easily as they are for someone who's neurotypical. So, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about it, but you could have, for example, issues in the way in which you're hearing information, or you could have a very short attention span, so then you completely lose where you are. You're having to jump through many more hoops to be able to perform the same tasks as someone who's neurotypical. So, we often get, for example, kids at school that have been told they've got slow processing. And I'm the first to say that does not mean they're not intelligent. It's got nothing to do with intelligence. It just means their brain is having to jump through these extra hoops before they get to even answer the question. And that's using up vital grey matter. So yeah, it's hard work, isn't it? Well, the hard work is fitting in a neurotypical world. That's the hard work.
Exhausting. It's like
exhausting.
Hard work is would be a great book title if you were to describe the ADHD, the neurodivergent experience. I mean, masking.
I might borrow that.
We're experts at playing a character called Normal. Like if there was a Oscar, a BAFTA for playing that character, we would be on stage accepting that award. Like we're chameleons, we're shapeshifters. But it's exhausting. Like it is incredibly hard work. But it is that invisible internal energy that nobody else sees.
Yeah.
But it's going on inside our heads all the time. And no wonder it kind of perpetuates this cycle of this burnout and exhaustion and maybe snapping when the overwhelm might get too much in a particular moment.
Yeah.
How important, how much of a big thing has neurodiversity been in your life?
Ooh, I'd say it's a big thing. So there are 6 of us in the immediate family. There's myself, my husband. We've got 4 rather grown-up children. I would say all of us, every single one, is neurodiverse to some degree or another. Even our dog is neurodiverse. I genuinely have a dog that is,
breed?
I would argue, has traits of autism and dyspraxia, but that's another whole story.
We'll have to have you back for a dog episode.
We'll come back to, unneurotypical pets can be another episode. But with all of that, I think genuinely comes great power. And I just think we've got to shift the conversation from how can we tolerate or accommodate people with neurodiversity to how can we actually harness the power of that difference? And that's what excites me, because I think we're going to let AI do all the boring stuff, right? We'll let it do the boring, convergent, logical thinking. We are going to need more and more people that can do the divergent, creative, lateral, big picture, connecting the dots thinking. And to be able to remove the barriers that prevent people who aren't neurotypical from achieving that really excites me, because I genuinely think that's going to be the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's so much brilliance within the neurodivergent brain. Out-of-the-box thinking, which is represented by the canvas behind you, which all of the guests sign. Pattern recognition. We're brilliant at finding unique solutions to really difficult problems. But just winding back a bit, I mean, within the neurodivergent brain, the ADHD brain, is it an imbalance of chemicals? What's going on in the brain that causes these positives and some of the struggles? Such
a good question. There are definitely biochemical imbalances in the majority, not everyone, but the majority of people who have ADHD. So there's someone called the Walsh Institute in the States. I don't know if you've heard about it or not.
No.
So this rather brilliant man called Dr. William Walsh, Bill Walsh, and he's now 90, and he's spent the last 45 years of his life analysing differences in biochemistry in people that have ADHD and also people with mental health problems, and comparing them to a typical population. In fact, he began his work looking at violent young offenders in prison and saying, what's different? What is there in their biochemistry? Is it all environment, or is some of it to do with biochemistry? So he has amassed the biggest biochemical database anywhere in the world looking at these things. And he's got, it's probably up to 7,000 now, people with ADHD in this chemical database. He found over 2/3 of them just happen to have this rather weird imbalance in that they have a low zinc to copper ratio. So he took bloods, and it meant they've got very low levels of zinc and very high levels of copper. Well, how is that relevant? We now know that copper acts as a cofactor to an enzyme that takes dopamine, so that's the thing we all know we don't have enough of, and it pushes it into being norepinephrine, which is the thing that makes you nervous and anxious or angry. It's the adrenaline-like response. So if you have too much copper, especially free copper, your dopamine is going to be pushed into this other pathway. And zinc has the opposite balancing effect on copper. So if you've got lots of zinc, you'll have lower copper. And if you've got lots of copper, the chances are your zinc's going to be very low. So he found this imbalance, and it's what explains exactly the thing that these stimulant meds work on. So they work to increase the dopamine. But why haven't you got enough dopamine? Well, he's saying because you've got this imbalance.
Right.
There's a problem with your metal metabolism. That's why. So we could actually address that at a different level. And we could say, why don't we just give your body what it needs to rebalance itself instead of just saying, here's a medication we can slap on top? Why don't we give your body what it needs to rebalance itself? So that's one. Sorry, it's a long answer.
Just that imbalance of copper and zinc, is that a genetic cause or is that an environmental cause?
That's a really good question as well, because it can be a mixed answer. The majority of times we think that it's a genetic predisposition, that some people are born just not very well able to excrete enough copper. Or other people, and we're going to talk about them, are born not well enough able to hang on to the zinc that they've got in their diet. I mean, you can get exposures as well. So, for example, we can have women that come to us who have sudden ADHD symptoms. They didn't have them before. Yes, it can be hormonally driven. Absolutely, it can. And I know you've had a whole series on that, which I thought was fascinating and absolutely brilliant. But they could also have, for example, the IUD coil. If it's a copper coil, they've got a source of copper in their body. And if they're born not able to excrete enough copper, that's going to be terrible. Or someone that moved into a really old house and there are copper water pipes in it. Well, that's going to raise their level of copper and they're going to get very hyper. Children who go through a growth spurt, the body needs zinc to grow. So if it's using up all the zinc to grow, it's not going to be using it to get rid of the copper, and the copper's going to spike and their behaviour is going to go downhill with that growth spurt. So it's a really interesting equilibrium there. But I mentioned there is another whole type of biochemistry that's also associated. This is all according to the Walsh Institute with ADHD, and that's pyrrole disorder. So this is something that a urine test will tell you if you've got or not, and it's about 30% of the ADHD population, we believe, within that database. So what pyrroles are, again, this is a genetic snip. It's something you're born with. It tends to run in families. And if you've got it, it means that even with the best diet in the world, you can't absorb or hang on to enough zinc, and you can't hang on to B6. You tend to urinate them out. Now, B6, again, is a really important factor that's needed for lots of neurotransmitters. And you don't have the zinc, so your copper's going to spike. You end up with very high levels of toxic metal buildup and oxidative stress. And people with this, there are a whole series of traits that tend to go with pyrrole disorder. So being up late at night, unable to sleep, terrible people in the morning, no appetite in the morning. There are cravings of things like spicy foods, salty foods, often very pale for ethnicity, dark shadows under the eyes. These are some of the traits. Tinnitus is another trait. There are lots of traits that can go with it. And if you have this, you're going to need to go well above the RDA dosing of things like zinc and B6 to be able to normalize the level. But, it's work that we specialize in doing, but you have to go very carefully, because what you don't want is tons of zinc and a copper dump, which will make everything worse. So you have to sort of carefully find your way through it. But my point is, there are biochemical imbalances, and you can treat those imbalances by giving the body what it needs in terms of vitamins, minerals, amino acids at high enough doses that it can rebalance itself. So it's a very different approach. And, Walsh's approach is very much to stay on your medication. Don't ever come off it unless your doctor tells you to. I want to be really clear on that. But his results show about 80% of people managing to come down off that medication as a result of doing nutrient therapy.
What about the emotional side of ADHD? Because I know you've just amazingly explained a lot of the chemical causes behind it, but I feel like as a consequence of those chemical imbalances, you give off certain behaviors into the world that expose you to negative feedback, because the way you're acting and going about your day is not quote unquote normal, and that exposes you to pushback. And the emotional knock-on effect of that could be a lot of shame, a lot of anxiety, a lot of isolating yourself because you become anxious. You learn that going out in the world is dangerous. It exposes you to criticism. Do you think that there's a treatment for the emotional side of ADHD? And I appreciate that's a big question, but where would you start?
It's a huge question. I always start with getting the chemistry right. If it's a question of chemistry, and there are other factors it can be, Because otherwise, I feel it's a little bit like sort of saying to someone who's an alcoholic, let's try and teach you to walk in a straight line before we take the alcohol out of the system, right? So let's sort out, what the underlying issue is. And then let's see if we can work to rebuild that confidence and to get you to dare to trust yourself again, really, in the world. Because the trouble is all of this is so interrelated. Our emotions are caused by our neurotransmitters, and the pathways, the stories, the narratives we tell ourselves in our brain are because our biochemistry was in a certain way that we just get in a groove of thinking we're not good at something, we must be hopeless, we must have imposter syndrome, we're not able to handle X, Y, and Z, and we tell ourselves these terrible ingrained stories. And I mean, the only way you can get outside of that groove is to step outside your comfort zone. And very often what we'll do is we'll try and rectify some of those underlying imbalances and then work with people, try to persuade them to dare to put a little toe in the water again, to try things out. And, because you only expand that comfort zone by going outside it. So that's really, really how we do it. But of course, things can be far more complicated. You may need talking therapies as well, and a whole mindset shift to go with it.
How does hearing impact ADHD?
So hearing's an area that people don't tend to think about very much, but it can have an impact on making a child more distractible, more inattentive, or an adult for that matter. For example, most hearing tests are just testing for deafness, but what they're not testing for is the detail of how someone hears. And you might have someone with through-the-roof hypersensitive hearing. Okay, so they could be listening to an overhead light bulb or, what's happening 3 offices away. And they could be very distractible because they're so busy tuning into that, that they're not really focusing right now on what's being said. So that's one example. Or you can even have what they call distortions in the hearing profile. And that just means for some people, it's like listening on a mobile phone in an area of poor reception. It becomes quite hard to process when someone's talking at you and your eyes glaze over and you think, what on earth has just been said to me? And often people aren't aware because the higher brain has to come in and unscramble what's come in as a mess. But again, that's a whole area that we work on. We do hearing tests, find out exactly how someone is hearing, and then work to correct it with something called bright beats, which is a form of auditory integration training. So it works to help reduce areas of hypersensitivity or to smooth out, all those sort of kinks in the hearing curve. And, for some people, that can just make focusing, not being as distracted, being able to really listen to what someone's saying just a lot easier. So it's just another factor that people often don't think about when they think about inattention.
I've heard some autistic people, and I don't know if there's truth to this, but they say they can hear electricity. Are there some background noise that a particular type of brain picks up where others don't?
Funny enough, I have come across people with that ability, and it can drive them absolutely nuts. Because the quietest thing we can test is at minus 10 decibels on an audiometer. And that's like, most people can't really hear at that level. But, I've certainly had a lot of autistic people whose hearing is absolutely through the roof. They're hearing all sounds in both ears at minus 10 decibels. And everything's very overwhelming for them. And very often that can be why they might not want to be in a loud social setting or not want to be in a restaurant, or because it's just too much, why the hand dries enough to kill anyone. So actually working to bring that within a normal level can be the difference between functioning fine and not functioning fine. And there was a beautiful documentary made about this in the States once called Sound of a Miracle that was all about a little girl, Georgiana Stelly, who had very hypersensitive hearing. And it's back in the 80s, she was institutionalized with autism. And anyway, and her mother moved to France, the family moved to France, and there was this brilliant French ENT doctor who specialized in this work. And I'm cutting a long story short, she went through a course of auditory integration training. And the story has it that evening she ran outside to go and play, and it was raining. And her father said, well, what are you doing? Come in, you hate the rain. And she said, but it doesn't sound like a machine gun anymore. So he didn't cure autism, but he made the hearing part of it so much more bearable. And so it's just a factor people don't think about, but it can be important. So again, it's just another one of those facets we look into.
And is hyper hearing, is that comparable to some stories I've heard where someone has a heightened sense of smell to the degree that they can smell illnesses?
I don't know if the two are related. It's actually a different brain region.
Right.
But I've heard about that. I know it's amazing. There's an amazing woman they're doing all this research with at the moment. I think it's just fascinating. And I've got a friend whose dog detected his cancer.
Wow.
So that's another whole podcast.
Yeah.
Very interesting one, though.
I think there's a way that an adult with ADHD or a child with ADHD, someone who's probably been made to feel like the way that they learn new things or take on new tasks or start a business, the way they do that is unusual, and that exposes them to comments from people like, "What are you doing? Why are you doing it that way? That's not the way you do it." And because of that, they don't do it. They feel bad. How do you allow someone who does maybe operate slightly differently to really embrace that the way they're doing it is differently, and that's not necessarily a bad thing?
I think there are two things that need to change. There's getting the person to be able to embrace that that's not a bad thing. And, as the lovely Bear Grylls put it, failure is a stepping stone to success, right? I've always loved that one. But I think one of the biggest things is just the school culture that we have, where we are judging people according to very neurotypical criteria and actually quite Victorian criteria, really, sitting down, logic, knowledge acquisition, being tested in time, circumstances, and you're being judged according to that. But that might not be the way in which your brain works. And it might not be, frankly, the definition of what success means in the future. So I think we need to broaden that out completely, our expectation and understanding of how it is one should be going about something. So it's as much societal change and educational change that's needed as the individual themselves daring to try something. But, one thing I'm always telling people is success isn't linear. We somehow think, if I don't do this, then I'm not going to get to that university, and then I'm not going to get the best job, and then I'm not going to get this. And that's not the way that it works. I mean, listen, you're a fabulous example, right? You're a fabulous example. You didn't follow a linear path, and you're very successful. You stepped outside it, and you dared to do it your own way. And I think there are certain professions that lend themselves to an ADHD brain, and certain ones that probably don't. And I would also argue the ones that probably don't, like being an accountant or maybe being a management consultant or, doing something where you have to turn up on time and do everything according to a very particular way. I do think AI is going to be doing a lot of those jobs in the future anyway. So it's actually beginning to shift the thinking that you are very well placed, really well placed to take advantage of the changes that are going to be happening. And you only have to look at who are the people that are running the biggest companies in the world at the moment? They are all neurodiverse.
Yes.
There isn't one neurotypical one amongst them.
But they found their passion, right? Those people who, and I count myself very privileged in the fact that I found my passion with Lad Bible, the social media brands. I found it again with the ADHD work. Yeah. When I went to university, I got kicked out, but I can reflect back now. And for me, even going to university was masking. Like I was doing stuff because I thought that's what normal, again, quote unquote, normal people do. And I was doing it to fit in and probably to please various family members. And it took me a lot of trial and error to realize what was masking, what was truly Alex, what was a coping mechanism to fit in, and what was me really following my passion. What steps can someone take? Because I've always said it's really important to follow or listen to your knee-jerk reactions. Like your body gives off signals of passion before your subconscious masked version has a chance to catch up. And what I mean by that is like, for example, if you're reading a newspaper and you see an advert for a musical theatre role, and you get incredibly excited for auditioning for that musical theatre role, but then you remember that your parents wanted you to be a doctor, or you were told something in the playground when you were younger that goes against that passion for that musical theatre role, and you suppress that excitement and you close the paper and you ignore it. That's a true indicator, I think, of your inner child almost screaming out, trying to remind you of what you generally are interested in before the years and years and years of masking had a chance to camouflage your true self. How can someone take steps to remove that camouflage, to find their true passions?
I mean, I think what you've just said actually applies to the whole world, and especially most children today. I think we are very good at shoehorning them into being in a certain way and micromanaging every moment of their day and pushing down a particular direction. And what we've lost is the ability, the freedom just to go out and play. I mean, Jonathan Haidt, the sociologist, has been writing about it. It's a book, The Anxious Generation. He's been talking about the fact that we've taken that freedom away, and we're micromanaging, we're hovering. So kids never have the opportunity to go out and play and enjoy themselves and actually be bored enough to discover what it is they're interested in. They don't have time to even think about what that is. And I think then what happens is you get pushed into a certain direction, as you said, and then especially if you've been masking things, it's even worse. And you end up at a point in time, you think, well, what is the end point? If you had managed to carry on and go through university, what would the end point of that would have been? Would have been you being in a job that you'd be miserable in. That would have been the best you could have hoped for had you conformed and really shoehorned yourself into that position.
Exactly.
You think, well, so that's a lifetime of misery. So if someone is in that position, and I think there are many, many people in that position, how can you rediscover who you really are? Because you've learned to shut off those feelings. There's a lovely little book called Ikigai. Have you read it? It's a little Japanese book. It's this thin. And it's about the Japanese idea of Ikigai. And it means having a purpose.
That's what my partner would probably call me.
That's when you don't shower. No, it's not that kind of Ikigai. It's another kind of Ikigai. But it means purpose. And it's a theory one of the theories as to why Japanese people can live so long as they do, because they've got this sense of purpose. They've got a sense of being valuable. And figuring out what on earth your Ikigai, your purpose is, in like what you were put on this planet to, and feeling good about one thing that you're doing and you're doing well is very hard. I think the closest you can come to it if you've lost your way is making sure you've got enough downtime to figure out what the things are you do that put you in a state of flow. When you're in a flow state and you don't even know time's going by and you're just kind of enjoying yourself, because the chances are that flow state will be very close to what it is you were put on this planet to do, to rediscover it. But yes, I think trying to develop emotional awareness, what you actually feel about something, unpicking that moment. How does it make me feel when I'm doing this? Am I actually forcing those feelings down and making myself do it? Or does it come naturally to me? And we've lost that. We don't allow ourselves that.
It's hard though, isn't it? Because you could do self-awareness exercises like sitting on your bed at the end of the day and asking yourself some basic questions like, what happened today that made me happy? What happened today that made me sad? Things like that. But sometimes the mask is so thick you don't even realize, and the answer to those questions are you're not being honest with yourself in those moments. But even if you are being honest, there's still factors in everyone's lives, right, that creates complications, and this isn't as easy as it sounds. Like even if you follow your passion and go to that musical theatre role, the fact is your parents want you to be a doctor, and that's going to cause family conflict, for example. Like, how does one prioritize their own journey following their own passion and almost not disregard, but put their own wants first rather than those closest to them that might be actually steering the ship?
When you were saying that, do you know what sprang to mind? Have you ever watched that Queen movie all about Freddie Mercury?
Yes, of course. Yeah, brilliant film. Yeah.
Do you remember the bit where his dad is nagging him to death to be an accountant,
Yes,
and he
very
just
well.
wants to be a fabulous, crazy musician? And there's just a point where he turns to his father, and he says to him, "And how did that work out for you, Dad?"
Yes, yeah. I can see the
If
scene.
that's the dream, if that is the dream that you are telling me to live, how did it work out for you? There's almost a point where it's almost, rather than having confidence in yourself, look around you and think, is that the end point? Is that actually what I want? I mean, weirdly, I started off life doing management consulting. I was awful at it, I'm sure, and I absolutely hated it. And I remember just looking around me and looking at the founding partners thinking, do I want to be you when I grow up? No, I really don't. So sometimes you can get confidence from that realization.
I think you have to have a certain amount of resilience to accept a period of uncomfortability until you almost prove them wrong. That takes a huge amount of courage. The many people that I know who have sort of broken out of that and pushed forward towards finding their passions, there was huge resistance at the seed stage on day one when they were telling their friends and family, like, I want to be an actor or I want to open a restaurant. And because it was so against the grain and so against what their family and friends were expecting of them, like, and huge courage and confidence to push through that stage.
And there's jealousy.
Well, it holds a mirror
There's
up.
jealousy because, you're saying you want to go and do something fabulous. And they're probably thinking, well, hang on, where's that leave me? because you're stepping at anyone that steps outside of the, I mean, I'm stepping outside the norm with what I'm saying. Don't just pop the pills. There are other things we can look at as well. Anyone that steps outside the accepted track will always get that. But if you're not doing that, you're not living your life anyway.
A quick word from our sponsor with a riddle. Can you guess the answer? Only 1 in 20 people can. What has 2 eyes, is smaller than a fingernail, lives inside your phone, and improves every element of your life and helps you remember all those social plans you made because you didn't know how to say no? Well, it's Tiimo app, of course. And I'd be lost without it. Literally, I'd never had made it to the studio. Tiimo app has organised me in a way no amount of notebooks ever could, and it's improving, evolving with your needs. And now it's even more simple with the AI Co-Planner. Tiimo offers an incredible conversational intelligence service, making it even easier to use. A simple voice prompt when you have to plan something or a task pops into your mind, and the new AI planning assistant hears it and smoothly transcribes it into an easily digestible list of instructions to guide you through. Give it a go and use the link in my bio for 30% off. Just a note though, this code is only applicable on the web browser, not the smartphone. Back to the episode. So interesting. I think people with ADHD are brilliant entrepreneurs. I truly believe that. But I think you have to have the courage to almost push back against the fear of the criticisms that you might get from those nearest to you. How else do you think you can spot a neurodiverse adult, someone who has been misunderstood when they were younger? How does that manifest as an adult? What behaviours might give that away?
Well, to talk about those behaviours, I'd probably have to talk about some of the other underlying contributing factors to an ADHD presentation. But first of all, you've got the emotional, the behavioural that you talked about. So you've got the, difficulty with criticism, imposter syndrome, lacking self-confidence. You've got all of that. But I would also be looking at other things like how they move. I'd be looking at their posture. I'd be looking at your posture. I'd be looking at...
What's my posture telling you?
Well, actually, I was looking, obviously the fidgeting and I'd be looking at that. I'd be looking at how someone sits. I'd be looking at how they walk. I'd be looking at whether or not, they recoil from loud sounds. There are loads of other facets which I'd be looking at that can give hints as to whether there are other underlying things that have made life harder than they should be. So, just to touch on briefly some of this, because we talked about biochemistry, there are other factors as well. So if you've got a much more inattentive, what used to be called ADD form of ADHD, what we found, I guess, over all our decades of clinical experience is very often that's got much more to do with something called retained primitive reflexes. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
You know what reflexes?
Well, I've heard of reflexes, but not...
So primitive ones, that basically means baby reflexes. So these are reflexes that are there. We all have them, and they're there in the first year of a baby's life. And what happens is one reflex comes up, gets stimulated, and then it integrates, and then the next one comes up, and then it integrates, and the next one comes up. And it's a set pattern for all of us in the first year of life, and it creates a lot of the wiring in the brain that we need later on in life for things to happen easily. It's like turning on the autopilot. Now, typically, by the time a baby reaches their first birthday, these reflexes have gone. So a doctor will test them in the first couple of months of life, and then they should have gone if you test them at 1. But we don't test them. We just assume they've gone. And we send someone off to school and we think they're neurodevelopmentally ready for school. But 9 times out of 10, if you've got someone with learning behavioural difficulties and you test them, you find they've got these little baby reflexes. So they've got these little immaturities that should have gone that haven't gone, and they mess things up. They mess up your balance, your coordination, your eye tracking. They can make you fidgety. They interfere with your concentration. So they can create a lot of the ADD symptoms because they just make it much more difficult to sit still and concentrate and process, information. So the way that you get rid of those, in fact, there are 2 in particular I should speak to if it's not too much, because I think they're very relevant to ADHD. So one is called the Moro reflex, and it's the early infant startle reflex. So I don't know if you've seen little babies, if there's any change to their environment, they'll do this. They'll go, and their arms and their legs will go, and they'll hold their breath, and you'll think, oh my God, what are they going to do? And then they cry and they cling on. That's the second bit of the movement. And when they're doing it, tons of adrenaline floods their system and there's a load of oxygen. Now, it's an alarm cry. It's a startle response. If there's any change in that baby's environment, they're going to get this kickstart. Parents are going to be alarmed, alarm cry, and they're going to cling on. So you can see evolutionarily, it's great. But it should have gone by about 3-4 months of age. The amount of adults I have seen, and we have treated, that have had a fully retained Mori reflex. Now, if you have this retained into adulthood, it makes you permanently anxious, okay? Huge dislike of criticism. Sounding familiar? It makes actually processing change can be quite difficult. You have lots of what they call sensoryism. So you're hypersensitive to light, sound, touch, taste, textures, all sorts of things. So it puts you in a permanent anxiety response. And very often mood swings go with that, impulsivity goes with that. So you can get rid of this by doing neurodevelopmental exercises. So you have to do them every day for a period of time until you've given that reflex enough stimulation, it goes. And when it's gone for life. And so then you're able to function in a completely different way. And we've worked with so many adults with terrible anxiety problems, ADHD problems, phobias. And actually at the root of it all was this particular little baby reflex that was messing things up. And there's another called a spinal galant that makes you very sensitive to waistbands, people that like to cut labels out and all that sort of thing. And it makes you fidgety. You can't sit comfortably on a chair without squirming and moving. It interferes with auditory processing. And in kids, it's also linked to bedwetting. And again, you get rid of it. You don't have to carry that around for the rest of your life. If it didn't go when it should have gone, you can get rid of it now. So those are other factors people don't think about when they think of ADHD or poor concentration.
That first one you mentioned, what was that called?
The Moro, after Dr. Moreau. It's
Dr.
the Moro
Moreau.
reflex, Moro.
Right. And you said there were some exercises you could do to get rid of it. What do those look like?
So they're called neurodevelopmental exercises, and they've been researched to death. They were developed by somebody called the INPP over 40 years ago. And what we specialize in are doing sort of programs of slow, controlled neuromotor movement. So it's like a little baby. That particular one, it's a slow motion startle movement that you do. And you do it enough that it's had enough stimulation and it goes. And as I said, it can be a seat. I mean, I've seen people come off psychiatric medications for anxiety as a result of, in fact, one was a doctor who came off a psychiatric medication because she didn't need it anymore, because she didn't have this ongoing anxiety anymore. So this is what I mean by swimming upstream from symptoms. Because you can pop a pill, or you can take the time to find out what's actually going on underneath.
What do you think some of the risks are of the sort of standard stimulant ADHD medication?
So risks, I'm sure most people that are taking them are probably already pretty well aware of the risks. But I think perhaps one thing people aren't aware of is if you look at the way in which stimulant meds work and the way cocaine works, it's exactly the same. It's probably quite shocking to people, but it works on the dopamine. It inhibits dopamine reuptake in the synapses. So they work exactly the same way. The only difference is that one works much quicker than the other and is therefore more addictive.
And that's
Okay?
cocaine?
Let's hope so. Yeah, well, put it this way. One is being prescribed to positively admired and prescribed for children, and the other will put you in jail, right? But actually, the mechanism by which they're working is the same. So there are side effects of taking this, and things like changes in sleep patterns, changes in appetite, anxiety. There can be tic disorders, personality changes. So most people are very familiar with those. And then longer term, in children, it's linked to stunted growth by 1 to 2 centimeters, and a small but real risk of a sort of psychotic breakdown as well. So I'm sounding terribly anti-meds. I'm not terribly anti-meds, and I think there are times when they are absolutely necessary. But my message is, check out all these other areas first. Do what you can to address the underlying contributing factors before taking this as a sort of panacea forevermore, because it may be that you don't need that in the end.
Why do you think unfulfilled potential can be such a tragedy?
Well, I think for anyone, whether, neurodivergent or not, it's a tragedy, isn't it? If you can't live we're only here once. We want to live our lives as our best self and feel useful, feel of value to people. And And I always think, it may just be more a question of context than your particular traits. So, there's this fantastic story that you may or may not know of someone called Gillian, who was a little girl, 8 years old in the kind of mid-1930s. And teachers were complaining at school because guess what? She was fidgety, she was inattentive, she was distracting the other kids in the classroom. And, at the time, ADHD didn't exist as a diagnosis, but they said it's probably some sort of learning difficulty. And they advised her mother to take her up to London and get her assessed by a psychiatrist. And so, Mother Julie went to London, took little Gillian up there, and she was sitting in one of those dark oak panelled, rather scary rooms I always find on Harley Street. And there was the psychiatrist looking at her. And he said to the mother, actually, can we stand outside the room for a second? I just want to ask you a few questions, if that's all right. And the mother thought, well, yes, that's fine. And little Gillian had been told to sit on her hands and try and pay attention. She was trying to sit there. And as the doctor went out, he flipped the switch on the radio and there was some music playing. And so they were standing outside the door and it was a glass door and they were looking in and little Gillian started dancing and she started leaping around the room and she started dancing on the desk. And the psychiatrist looked through the window at her and said to her mother, your daughter's not sick. There's nothing wrong with her. She's a dancer. That little girl then ended up going to dance school. She ended up at the Royal Ballet and she became principal ballerina. And she from there migrated into being in charge of choreography and producing musicals. She produced over 60 of the leading West End and Broadway musicals, including Cats, including Phantom of the Opera. There is a theatre named after her. Her name is Dame Gillian Lynn. So I just think that's such an important message for people with ADHD, which is sometimes it's to do with the context you find yourself in. As to where your value lies. And maybe if you're feeling not valued, you're just sitting in the wrong context. Maybe you're doing the wrong job or you're in the wrong area and it's nothing wrong with you. It's your context that's the problem. So let's find the right one for you.
Absolutely. I have heard that story before, and only because it comes to my mind because Phantom of the Opera is my favourite West End show, and I've seen it about 16 times.
Wow.
And there's a big picture of Gillian Lynn in the foyer. And I think of that story every time I go to see that show. And it's so true. The value of something completely changes depending on its environment. Her value in a classroom, in her mind at least, would have been low. Because of the feedback she was getting, but put her on a stage, Put her in an environment that caters to her brilliance, and she changed the world.
So I think we need to remember that, don't we? Let's change our context. Let's not beat ourselves up anymore.
Sarah, what do you think the risks are of not taking ADHD medication? Could ADHD medication sometimes be the lesser of two evils?
I think totally, yeah, because if you've got someone who's very ADHD and they don't take the medications, you've got the risk of sort of risk-taking behaviour, potentially addictions in the future, alcoholism, all that sort of thing. So it's better to do something. It's just that my view is very much take the time. You're worth it. You're worth the time and energy of trying to figure out what some of the underlying contributing factors are. And if you've gone through all of those and you've checked out the diet and the exercise and you've made sure it's not a hormonal problem and there are no retained reflexes and your hearing's working the way it should and you've checked off all of those things, then look at the medication.
Copper and zinc we were talking about earlier. Do your levels of copper and zinc go up or down during pregnancy?
So actually copper goes up 200% when you're pregnant. So it shoots through the roof. And for most people, that's fine because after they've delivered the baby, their body's able to excrete that copper. But again, if you're one of these people with a sort of ADHD type predisposition and you're not very good at excreting copper, then it hangs around in the system. And, that can be a contributing factor to postpartum depression. So we think there potentially is a link between that and ADHD. And, sometimes we see, for example, a girl when she starts puberty and her estrogen goes up. Estrogen generally will increase dopamine levels and serotonin levels. But if you have this problem with copper, it can actually have the reverse effect and it can reduce that in certain individuals. So that going on the pill can have an effect. So yes, if there's suddenly an onset and it coincides with a hormonal shift, then it's definitely worth looking into that as well.
You studied experimental psychology at Oxford University. What did that experience teach you about the evolutionary purpose of ADHD?
Again, that's such a good question. First of all, I just want to say everyone is neurodiverse at Oxbridge, okay? I don't think there'd be any dreaming spies if it wasn't as neurodiverse. And, people are able to think differently and definitely act differently. So I was very obsessed with evolution. It's one of my favorite subjects. And actually, at the time, this really dates me. It was all about the selfish gene, and I was all over the selfish gene. And, the theory behind that is that rather than it being all about us, it's actually about we're gene machines and we want to perpetuate our genes within the gene pool. So it's looking at a group structure, a sort of a structure of a family. And I think the role that ADHD plays is really, really important evolutionarily, because these are the people that would have eyes in the back of their head that would be on the lookout all the time if there was any sort of imminent threat to that particular tribe. They would be the ones that would go the distance and maybe discover a new food source that no one else had thought about. So really important. And without the ADHD brain, your tribe would be at a disadvantage, and collectively the genes in the gene pool would not be doing as well. So yes, it absolutely has a reason and a purpose.
I absolutely agree. I mean, ADHD people, we were the ones keeping watch over the camp, staying up all night, stoking the fire.
That's it.
And I suppose being part of a tribe, part of a group, like you fear being excluded from it for a whole ton of reasons. But you might change your personality, do you think, to avoid being kicked out? And I suppose, does that therefore mean masking has some kind of evolutionary function?
Totally, yeah. Because we evolved. I mean, a very important part of our survival is being part of that group, being an accepted part of the group. So, we've learnt to mask. We've learnt to do what we need to do to be able to read other people's signals, to be able to fit in. And, children spend their lives, especially their teenage years, just wanting to fit in. And I think this is what's so pernicious about the culture we currently have of cancelling people. I mean, even the term cancelling, I find abhorrent, because in effect, what you're doing is excluding someone from that group. And that's what animals do if they want to kill another animal. They exclude it from the group. That's what monkeys do. And then the monkey that's on its own will die. And we're getting these terrible stories of people committing suicide. At university, there was a kid at Oxford who committed suicide. He'd been excluded. He'd been cancelled. So it's terrifying. I think it's like a sort of mob mentality. I know I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but that's the flip side of masking. It's saying it's really important that we're part of a group. And it's terribly damaging to exclude someone from that group.
Do you think that's heightened in the ADHD community when it's a community of people that are probably used to feeling othered, very much feeling different and misunderstood, and therefore is there a risk that that difference might put them at risk of being ostracized, excluded from social groups?
Yes, actually, I'm only smiling because someone sprung to mind when you were saying that, who's a really good friend of my eldest son's, and he doesn't mind me talking about him, Theo, because he's done a beautiful testimonial for us, but he managed to get cancelled, I think, twice when he was at Oxford. And I think it was all within very short succession. And he's very ADHD, and he's exceptionally well-meaning, and he's a lovely guy, but he just kept putting his foot in it, or saying something he wasn't meant to say, and being cancelled as a result. And we ended up doing a lot of work with Theo when he became. Actually, it's quite interesting. He became very, very depressed in his last year at Oxford, and he was always very high achieving, very motivated. He was a rower. He was always very capable, pushed himself very hard, but he had that ADHD perfectionist thing going on. Right, he was one of the people that just sort of have to do everything to absolutely the point of excellence until he couldn't cope anymore, until he virtually broke, and he dropped out after taking a couple of exams, and then he ended up in his bed at home, literally unable to function. And I think was under the care of a couple of psychiatrists who were prescribing medications. But all I know is he was on a stimulant and an antidepressant at the same time, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But he was in a terrible state, and he was saying, I don't think there's much, point of me being here. I'm a waste of space. And we did our work, we did our tests, and we found very predictable, really predictable biochemical imbalances. So he had exactly the hallmarks of ADHD. And he also had something called undermethylation, which can push you into a deep depression and perfectionist cycle. So again, he did exactly what he was asked, and it's all about compliance. But he felt so bad and so desperate. He, changed his diet, took exactly the supplements that were needed, and did brilliantly well. He not only went back the next year, he came out with a first in Russian and Arabic, I think it was, and said, the difference is I now understand my own health, and I get the levers that I need to pull to stay on top of it. And I know when I'm slipping, and I know what I need to take. So it's giving people the keys. It's saying that's in your control now, your own health, your own well-being, rather than it just being prescribed for you.
Just with masking, when do you think masking becomes a problem? Because on the one hand, you mask because you want to fit in and not be excluded from a group. You don't want to experience the pain you were just experiencing. But on the other hand, we're talking about wanting to unmask and be our true selves and find our passions. When does one know if you're masking too much? When does masking become a problem?
I think there are time for really honest and open conversations, especially with your nearest and dearest. So, for example, if you're blowing out your girlfriend on dinner dates or, important events, because you don't know, because there's now or there's not now. And so you've forgotten that it's a not now. Being able to sit down and just explain that this is a difference. And it's not that I love you any less. It's not. And it's not that you're any less important to me. You really are. But this is a fundamental difference, and you can't understand that unless you're wired in the same way that I am. And sometimes literally sitting down, whoever it is that's in your life, and explaining it. And, and sometimes when you do that, people then tick the box and think, okay, I've got it right. Well, in that case, then we're going to handle this situation differently. And I think the more of those conversations that take place, the better. Because society does need to change, and it needs to become a lot more tolerant. I think we're very intolerant as a society at the moment. We need to just become a lot more tolerant of difference. And I'm using that word tolerant. Celebrate, harness the power of, realize that it is actually a gift.
I think it's so important. I mean, it's so true what you said, and to really pay attention. As soon as you notice there's a massive contrast between how you're acting around certain people compared to how you're acting when you're on your own. I think my biggest indicator of when I'm not masking is when I'm on my own and when I know no one is watching me. If I'm just left alone at home and what am I choosing to watch on the TV?
Yeah. When
it's literally, there's no external influence. When I'm driving on my own and there's music playing, I am singing.
Yeah.
I turn into the drummer. Yeah. Obviously my hands, but if someone's in the car, and I can't do that around certain people, but I know what I like to do when I'm on my own. And when that is so different to how Alex presents in other situations, then I think that can create quite clear optics on the contrast.
You see, I think that's really interesting. And you have painted in your own head an expectation of which person you can do that in front of and what they will find acceptable or not. You might be surprised. I mean, I'd love a good sing-along in a car and playing. In fact, frankly, I do it at the top of my voice anyway. But you might be surprised. You might be surprised. You may have painted yourself a little bit into this corner by thinking that other people won't find it acceptable, and they might. They might find it interesting and fun and not boring.
What do you think is normal? It's such a big question, isn't it? What is normal human behavior versus what is perhaps non-normal human behavior? Where do we even go with that conversation?
So the longer I live, I don't think, but what is normal? Does normal even exist? If it does exist, I've yet to meet it, and it certainly isn't in my family. I mean, who is normal? What is not? Normal sounds very boring to me, and I don't know if that's just me, but I don't know what it means. Do we mean adhering to a sort of very conventional norm? And what is that norm? And who's decided what that norm is? And what makes that so acceptable? I don't know, but I do feel strongly that it's really unfair that people who are more on the peripheries of the bell curve, shall we say, are the ones that are having to do so they're dealing with all that anyway, and then they've got to do all the conforming to try and fit in with the mainstream. I think particularly with autism, by the way, I find that extraordinary when we're the lunatics and the nutters, and actually they're the ones that are completely rational and sane and kind of doing things in a very predictable way. And we're saying, no, you've got to change and be more like us. It's like, why? When did that become a thing? I don't know if I even answered your question, did I?
I mean, basically, yeah, you take away the traits of ADHD or many neurodivergent traits, and I think you're right. You get somebody that I've never met.
Yeah, I've never met them. I genuinely can't say I know anyone who is normal. And maybe it's because I tend to be attracted more to people who are a little interesting. I don't know. But aren't most people?
Well, yeah, you certainly, yeah. I mean, what do you think? Is there anything about ADHD that you don't understand, that you still don't get?
Oh gosh, I think there are so many things we don't understand about ADHD. So for example, with autism, they're now saying, oh, there are actually 9 completely different types of autism. And I think we're just scratching the surface with ADHD. And, the point is no one ever fits neatly into one box, which is why I have this issue with a very formulaic, one-size-fits-all approach to treatment for ADHD, which is medication or find ways to compensate. People can have a little smorgasbord of this and that and different types of neurodiversity all blended together. If you've got ADHD, there's some evidence from the Autism Research Foundation in America that taking stimulant meds can make it worse. So I just think we're at the very foothills of our understanding. And I just really, really hope that not only will we take the time and energy to investigate our own bio-individuality, but that societal attitudes will start to shift and we'll realize what a great value this is going to be, because these are going to be the people that are rewriting the future. And thank goodness, because frankly, we need a bit of rewriting of the future.
What traits of autism do you think, and I know this is just, I don't know the details of the study, I don't know if you do, but what traits of autism do you think could get worse? Because I don't want to stereotype, but I think I have autism too, and I can see it being very internalized, like I see things incredibly clearly. And if I take and sometimes they can be bad, right? Sometimes I don't want to focus on certain things, and the autism comes with considerable struggles, intrusive thoughts, ruminating, horrible spirals that cause problems in relationships. And if I take a pill that increases my focus and sharpens that image inside my head, like I don't know the study you're talking about, but I can kind of see that could be a pretty bad outcome.
Yeah, I think there are overlaps, but there are also a lot of differences. The study I was referring to, it was a questionnaire that was given to 25,000 parents of autistic children. And they said, out of everything you've tried, what's helped, what hasn't helped, what's made it worse. And it was just interesting that the first page was all about medication, and they had stimulant meds. And more people got worse on it than got better if they were autistic. And actually it was things like gluten casein-free diet or, things like giving very particular supplements, working on gut microbiome. Those were the things that tended to lead to the biggest improvements. So, yeah, I think I don't have the answer to that because there isn't a study precisely on that, but there are definitely overlapping factors in ADHD and autism. And there are other things that are very, very different. But again, that's why I think just blindly saying, hey, take this and let's see what happens is never a great strategy, is it really?
Do you have any surefire ways to manage ADHD?
So I guess my advice would be, first of all, take the time, swim upstream from the symptoms, try and find underlying root causes. So as I said, if you've looked at your diet, you've looked at the exercise, how's your body clock doing? Have you done a circadian rhythm reset? How are your hormones doing? Are you up all night on TikTok, reducing your sort of dopamine focus? When you've gone through all of the obvious things and then you've looked at all the stuff that I'm talking about, have you had your biochemistry checked? Have you had the blood test, the urine test to find out exactly your biochemical type? And have you worked on that? Have you checked if there are any retained reflexes? Could there be auditory issues that are going on? When you've gone through all of that, then think about medication. But as I said, there is a risk of not medicating, which is, risk of risk-taking behaviour and all that sort of thing. But I think that's the process that I would go through.
This has been truly fascinating, Sarah. I have been patiently waiting to reveal your ADHD item.
Yes.
Every week I ask a guest to bring in an item that most represents ADHD in yours. Unusually this week, normally it's on the table, but this week it's hanging up. It's a football. This week, I'm going to reveal your ADHD item. That is a very cool disco ball, bringing a bit of Saturday Night Fever into the ADHD Chatter studio.
Don't get me started.
Why does a disco ball represent ADHD?
I thought of it because I thought in many ways ADHD people do just live in the moment. Okay, so when people talk about living in the moment, it sounds very zen, but they're living in the moment with a million eyes, with eyes in the back of their head. They are looking at and noticing absolutely everything that is taking place then. And that's what's so utterly brilliant about it, because they're going to see connections.
Yes.
They're going to notice things that other people don't notice. That's why they're so great for the tribe, right? So they've got that. But the other thing is, I find people with ADHD are great fun, right? They're the ones you want at the party. They're sparkling personalities. They're always the people that you want to hang out with. And so I just thought a disco ball summed it all up for me.
They're going to bring the vibe up and then overthink about it when they get home.
That's exactly what they're going to do.
Do you think that ability to see more, pick up on little micro expressions, do you think that intuition, do you think that makes someone a good judge of character, someone with ADHD?
I think so. I think because they will pick up on signals that other people would have missed. And they might not know why, and they might not be able to remember it and pinpoint it, but they will have a strong hunch that there was just something in that room that didn't quite add up. Yes. Because they will have noticed something.
Yeah, that person that everyone likes, when they turn out to be a wrong 'un, or they get cancelled.
Right. Yeah,
like, we told you so.
Something awful will happen. Yeah.
Fascinating. Love the disco ball, Sarah. It'll probably stay there, actually, front and centre.
It looks good there, doesn't it? It looks good.
I want to do, penultimately, the ADHD agony aunt section, which is called the washing machine of woes. My ADHD item is a washing machine because I always leave my clothes in the machine after the laundry, after the cycle's finished. And I ask all my guests, do you relate to that struggle?
Do I have stinky, wet clothes in the washing machine?
Please tell me you do. I feel less alone whenever the guests say yes.
There are plenty of stinky, wet clothes in the washing machine, but they're not always mine, is what I'd like to say. I try not to. And also we've got this really annoying machine that sings this whole song up
Mine
and down.
As well.
But it's so annoying. Do you ignore it when it does it?
Yeah, I say classic. I'll do it later. And then I get obsessed in something on Google, like the mating habits of blue whales. And
you see, I get hypersensitive enough to it that I think, right, I'm going to have to open that. Again, it's probably hypersensitive hearing, the other thing we didn't mention, but it could be, that it annoys me enough that I will go and I will take it out then and there. Now, would I remember it if it was just doing it without that? No, probably not, because I would be hyper-focusing on something else.
To be fair, I have been using the Tiimo app, and they truly are brilliant. I've been getting a lot better at remembering stuff.
That's good.
This week, Sarah, in the washing machine of woes, someone has written in and asked, I performed poorly at school with terrible grades, but I know I'm bright, just with an ADHD brain that works and sees things differently. It's affecting my self-esteem. What can I do to get my confidence back?
Gosh, and that's something we see so often at the clinic, just people underperforming relative to how smart they are. I think Chris Evans talked about it. He said the way that kids are being judged at school, he said it's like you're in the middle of the jungle and there's a tree and you've got a monkey and you've got a crocodile and you've got a kangaroo, and the competition is who can climb the tree the quickest. I mean, that's basically what we're doing to children at school. Yeah. How do you get your confidence back? Well, I'm assuming you will have done something then as a career that is not necessarily requiring top academic grades. So you've already found some particular area. One of the main things is listen to this podcast, right? Listen to this podcast and you'll realize that it's just about a difference in thinking, and it has nothing to do with intelligence levels whatsoever. Working to remove those barriers to being able to put things down on a piece of paper or, think about things in a particular order. It is possible to do that through the reflex work, through auditory work, through looking at the biochemistry. But overall, it's realizing that difference is a benefit. It's not actually anything that's going to hold you back.
Absolutely. We had a brilliant guest on, Dr. Alex George, who just reminded me. He said many of the things that you feel anxious and different for when you're younger turn out to be the things that you're most proud of and your biggest strengths when you're an adult. I guess it's the having the awareness and the confidence to find out what they are, know what they are, and have the ability to lean into them. So I think when someone with ADHD figures out what they truly are passionate about and they have the confidence to lean into it, that's when they become world-beating, world-class at that thing.
I think that's right. Because again, back to this thing of conformity, you spend your teens trying to fit in. And as an adult, you spend your life desperately trying to stand out from the crowd.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sarah, fantastic. Just finally, I want to deliver a letter that was written by the previous guest where they wrote their 3 rules to live by.
Okay.
Here we go.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So the first one is find your signal and follow it with passion and ignore the noise. Yeah. And having that peace and quiet to find the signal, I totally agree with that. Question everything and find the why, which is where the signal is. Gosh, that's a bit of a complex one. Question everything and find the why, which is where the signal is. I find that a little hard, just the language.
Quite cryptic, isn't it? It's a bit of a brain puzzle.
I think it's just saying be calm and think about the why. Yes, and be comfortable with being vulnerable. It opens doors.
Very true.
That's a really good one, isn't it? Because we always think we have to appear bulletproof to people. And actually, no, the minute you feel close to someone is the moment they show their vulnerability.
You have to show vulnerability, right? Even if it's in baby steps to expose your true self.
You do.
Because masking is the opposite of being vulnerable.
It is.
So you have to almost test the water, test little urges you have, different hobbies you want to try, little different ways you want to say sentences, like baby steps, bit at a time. And that's vulnerability. When they get approved and you realize that they're not broken, then you can do more of it.
And it's an act of trust.
Sarah, absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed it.